The order of nature. 101. 154. Thus in general an unspecialized society does not secure conditions favorable for intensity of satisfaction among its members, whereas a structured society with a high grade of complexity will in general be deficient in survival value. In other words, such societies will in general be specialized, in the sense of requiring a very special sort of environment. Thus the problem for nature is the production of societies which are structured, with a high complexity, and which are at the same time unspecialized. In this way, intensity is mated with survival. Section 7. There are two ways in which structured societies have solved this problem. Both ways depend on that enhancement of the mental pole, which is a factor in intensity of experience. One way is by eliciting a massive average objectification of a nexus, while eliminating the detailed diversities of the various members of the nexus in question. This method, in fact, employs the device of blocking out unwelcome detail. It depends on the fundamental truth that objectification is abstraction. It utilizes this abstraction inherent in objectification so as to dismiss the thwarting elements of a nexus into negative prehensions. At the same time the complex intensity in the structured society is supported by the massive objectifications of the many environmental nexus, each in its unity as one nexus, and not in its multiplicity as many actual occasions. This mode of solution requires the intervention of mentality operating in accordance with the category of transmutation, i.e., categorical obligation B. It ignores diversity of detail by overwhelming the nexus by means of some congenial uniformity which pervades it. The environment may then change indefinitely so far as concerns the ignored details so long as they can be ignored. The close association of all physical bodies, organic and 155 inorganic alike, with presented loci, definable 15 by straight lines, suggests that this development of mentality is characteristic of the actual occasions which make up the structured societies which we know as material bodies. This close association is evidenced by the importance of acceleration in the science of dynamics. Tiefer acceleration is nothing else than a mode of estimating the shift from ONC family of presented loci to another such family CF. Part 4. Such mentality represents the first grade of ascent beyond the mere reproductive stage which employs nothing more than the category of conceptual reproduction, i.e., categorical obligation IV. There is some initiative of conceptual integration, but no originality in conceptual prehension. This initiative belongs to the category of transmutation, and the excluded originality belongs to the category of reversion. 15 cf. ch. IV of this part and also part 4. 102. Discussions and applications. These material bodies belong to the lowest grade of structured societies which are obvious to our gross apprehensions. They comprise societies of various types of complexity: crystals, rocks, planets, and suns. Such bodies are easily the most long-lived of the structured societies known to us, capable of being traced through their individual life histories. The second way of solving the problem is by an initiative in conceptual prehensions, i.e., in appetition. The purpose of this initiative is to receive the novel elements of the environment into explicit feelings with such subjective forms as conciliate them with the complex experiences proper to members of the structured society. Thus in each concrescent occasion its subjective aim originates novelty to match the novelty of the environment. In the case of the higher organisms, this conceptual initiative amounts to thinking about the diverse experiences. In the case of lower organisms, this conceptual initiative merely amounts to thoughtless adjustment of aesthetic emphasis in obedience to an ideal of harmony. 156. In either case the creative determination which transcends the occasion in question has been deflected by an impulse original to that occasion. This deflection in general originates a self-preservative reaction throughout the whole society. It may be unfortunate or inadequate, and in the case of persistent failure we are in the province of pathology. This second mode of solution also presupposes the former mode. Thus the categories of conceptual reversion and of transmutation are both called into play. Structured societies in which the second mode of less than elution has importance are termed living. It is obvious that a structured society may have more or less life, and that there is no absolute gap between living and non-living societies. For certain purposes, whatever life there is in a society may be important, and for other purposes, unimportant. A structured society in which the second mode is unimportant, and the first mode is important will be termed inorganic. In accordance with this doctrine of life, the primary meaning of life is the origination of conceptual novelty of appetition. Such origination can only occur in accordance with the category of reversion. Thus a society is only to be termed living in a derivative sense. A living society is one which includes some living occasions. Thus a society may be more or less living, according to the prevalence in it of living occasions. Also an occasion may be more or less living according to the relative importance of the novel factors in its final satisfaction. Thus the two ways in which dominant members of structured societies secure stability amid environmental novelties are I. Elimination of diversities of detail, and E. Origination of novelties of conceptual reaction. As the result, there is withdrawal or addition of those details of emphasis whereby the subjective aim directs the 157 integration of prehensions in the concrescent phases of dominant members. The Order of Nature. Section 8. 103. There is yet another factor in living societies which requires more detached analysis. A structured society consists in the patterned intertwining of various nexus with markedly diverse defining characteristics. Some of these nexus are of lower types than others, and some will be of markedly higher types. There will be the subservient nexus and the regnant nexus within the same structured society. This structured society will provide the immediate environment which sustains each of its sub-societies, subservient and regnant alike. In a living society only some of its nexus will be such that the mental poles of all their members have any original reactions. These will be its entirely living nexus, and in practice a society is only called living when such nexus are regnant. Thus a living society involves nexus which are inorganic, and nexus, which are inorganic, do not need the protection of the whole living society for their survival in a changing external environment. Such nexus are societies, but entirely living nexus do require such protection if they are to survive. According to this conjectural theory, an entirely living nexus is not a society. This is the theory of the animal body, including a unicellular body as a particular instance. A complex inorganic system of interaction is built up for the protection of the entirely living nexus, and the originative actions of the living elements are protective of the whole system. On the other hand, the reactions to the whole system provide the intimate environment required by the entirely living nexus. We do not know of any living society devoid of its subservient apparatus of inorganic societies. Physical physiology deals with the subservient inorganic apparatus, and psychological physiology seeks to deal with entirely living nexus, partly in abstraction 158 from the inorganic apparatus, and partly in respect to their response to the inorganic apparatus, and partly in regard to their response to each other. Physical physiology has, in the last century, established itself as a unified science. Psychological physiology is still in the process of incubation. It must be remembered that an integral living society, as we know it, not only includes the subservient inorganic apparatus, but also includes many living nexus, at least one for each cell. Section X. It will throw light upon the cosmology of the philosophy of organism to conjecture some fundamental principles of psychological physiology as suggested by that cosmology and by the preceding conjectures concerning the societies of our epoch. These principles are not necessitated by this cosmology, but they seem to be the simplest principles which are both consonant with that cosmology, and also fit the facts. 104. Discussions and applications. In the first instance, consider a single living cell. Such a cell includes subservient inorganic societies, such as molecules and electrons. Thus, the cell is an animal body, and we must presuppose the physical physiology proper to this instance. But what of the individual living occasions? The first question to be asked is as to whether the living occasions, in abstraction from the inorganic occasions of the animal body, form a corpuscular sub-society, so that each living occasion is a member of an enduring entity with its personal order. In particular, we may ask whether this corpuscular society reduces to the extreme instance of such a society, namely, to one enduring entity with its one personal order. The evidence before us is of course extremely slight, but so far as it goes, it suggests a negative answer to both these questions. A cell gives no evidence whatever of a single unified mentality, guided in each of its OCA 159 scions by inheritance from its own past. The problem to be solved is that of a certain originality in the response of a cell to external stimulus. The theory of an enduring entity with its inherited mentality gives us a reason why this mentality should be swayed by its own past. We ask for something original at the moment, and we are provided with a reason for limiting originality. Life is a bid for freedom. An enduring entity binds any one of its occasions to the line of its ancestry. The doctrine of the enduring soul with its permanent characteristics is exactly the irrelevant answer to the problem which life presents. That problem is, how can there be originality? And the answer explains how the soul need be no more original than a stone. The theory of a corpuscular society, made up of many enduring entities, fits the evidence no better. The same objections apply. The root fact is that endurance is a device whereby an occasion is peculiarly bound by a single line of physical ancestry, while life means novelty, introduced in accordance with the category of conceptual reversion. There are the same objections to many traditions as there are to one tradition. What has to be explained is originality of response to stimulus. This amounts to the doctrine that an organism is alive when in some measure its reactions are inexplicable by any tradition of pure physical inheritance. Explanation by tradition is merely another phraseology for explanation by efficient cause. We require explanation by final cause. Thus a single occasion is alive when the subjective aim which determines its process of concrescence has introduced a novelty of definiteness not to be found in the inherited data of its primary phase. The novelty is introduced conceptually and disturbs the inherited, responsive, adjustment of subjective forms. It alters the values, in the artist's sense of that term. It follows from these considerations that in abstraction from its animal body and entirely living nexus is not 160 properly a society at all, since life cannot be a defining characteristic. It is the name for originality, and not for tradition. The mere response to stimulus is characteristic of all societies whether inorganic or alive. Action and reaction are bound to the order of nature. 105 together. The characteristic of life is reaction adapted to the capture of intensity, under a large variety of circumstances. But the reaction is dictated by the present and not by the past. It is the clutch at vivid immediacy. Section X. Another characteristic of a living society is that it requires food. In a museum the crystals are kept under glass cases. In zoological gardens the animals are fed. Having regard to the universality of reactions with environment, the distinction is not quite absolute. It cannot, however, be ignored. The crystals are not agencies requiring the destruction of elaborate societies derived from the environment. A living society is such an agency. The societies which it destroys are its food. This food is destroyed by dissolving it into somewhat simpler social elements. It has been robbed of something. Thus, all societies require interplay with their environment, and in the case of living societies this interplay takes the form of robbery. The living society may, or may not, be a higher type of organism than the food which it disintegrates. But whether or no it be for the general good, life is robbery. It is at this point that with life morals become acute. The robber requires justification. The primordial appetitions which jointly constitute God's purpose are seeking intensity, and not preservation. Because they are primordial, there is nothing to preserve. He, in his primordial nature, is unmoved by love for this particular, or that particular, for in this foundational process of creativity, there are no preconstituted particulars. In the foundations of his being, God is indifferent alike to preservation and to novelty. 161. He cares not whether an immediate occasion be old or new, so far as concerns derivation from its ancestry. His aim 16. For it is depth of satisfaction as an intermediate step towards the fulfillment of his own being. His tenderness is directed towards each actual occasion, as it arises. Thus God's purpose in the creative advance is the evocation of intensities. The evocation of societies is purely subsidiary to this absolute end. The characteristic of a living society is that a complex structure of inorganic societies is woven together for the production of a non-social nexus characterized by the intense physical experiences of its members. But such an experiences derivate from the complex order of the material animal body, and not from the simple, personal order, of past occasions with analogous experience. There is intense experience without the shackle of reiteration from the past. This is the condition for spontaneity of conceptual reaction. The conclusion to be drawn from this argument is that life is a characteristic of empty space, and not of space occupied by any corpuscular society. In a nexus of living occasions, there is a certain social deficiency. Life lurks in the interstices of each living cell, and in the end. 16 cf. Part 5. 106. Discussions and applications. Interstices of the brain. In the history of a living society, its more vivid manifestations wander to whatever quarter is receiving from the animal body an enormous variety of physical experience. This experience, if treated inorganically, must be reduced to compatibility by the normal adjustments of mere responsive reception. This means the dismissal of incompatible elements into negative prehensions. The complexity of the animal body is so ordered that in the critical portions of its interstices the varied datum of physical experience is complex, and on the edge of a compatibility beyond that to be achieved by mere inorganic treatment. A novel conceptual prehension disturbs 162 the subjective forms of the initial responsive phase. Some negative prehensions are thus avoided, and higher contrasts are introduced into experience. So far as the functioning of the animal body is concerned, the total result is that the transmission of physical influence, through the empty space within it, has not been entirely in conformity with the physical laws holding for inorganic societies. The molecules within an animal body exhibit certain peculiarities of behavior not to be detected outside an animal body. In fact, living societies illustrate the doctrine that the laws of nature develop together with societies which constitute an epoch. There are statistical expressions of the prevalent types of interaction. In a living cell, the statistical balance has been disturbed. The connection of food with life is now evident. The highly complex inorganic societies required for the structure of a cell, or other living body, lose their stability amid the diversity of the environment. But, in the physical field of empty space produced by the originality of living occasions, chemical dissociations and associations take place which would not otherwise occur. The structure is breaking down and being repaired. The food is that supply of highly complex societies from the outside which, under the influence of life, will enter into the necessary associations to repair the waste. Thus life acts as though it were a catalytic agent. The short summary of this account of a living cell is as follows. An extremely complex and delicately poised chemical structure. For the occasions in the interstitial, empty, space a complex objective datum derived from this complex structure. Under normal, responsive, treatment, devoid of originality, the complex detail reduced to physical simplicity by negative prehensions. This detail preserved for positive feeling by the emotional and purposive readjustments produced by originality of conceptual feeling. Appetition the physical distortion of the field, leading to instability of 163. The structure accepting repair by food from the environment. Section 11. The complexity of nature is inexhaustible. So far we have argued that the nature of life is not to be sought by its identification with some society of the order of nature. 107. Occasions, which are living in virtue of the defining characteristic of that society. Entirely living, nexus is, in respect to its life, not social. Each member of the nexus derives the necessities of its being from its prehensions of its complex social environment. By itself the nexus lacks the genetic power which belongs to societies. But a living nexus, though non-social in virtue of its life, may support a thread of personal order along some historical root of its members. Such an enduring entity is a living person. It is not of the essence of life to be a living person. Indeed, a living person requires that its immediate environment be a living, non-social nexus. The defining characteristic of a living person is some definite type of hybrid prehensions transmitted from occasion to occasion of its existence. The term hybrid is defined more particularly in Part 3. It is sufficient to state here that a hybrid prehension is the prehension by one subject of a conceptual prehension, or of an impure prehension belonging to the mentality of another subject. By this transmission the mental originality of the living occasions receives a character and a depth. In this way originality is both canalized, to use Bergson's word, and intensified. Its range is widened within limits. Apart from canalization, depth of originality would spell disaster for the animal body. With it, personal mentality can be evolved, so as to combine its individual originality with the safety of the material organism on which it depends. Thus life turns back into society. It binds originality within bounds, and gains the massiveness due to reiterated character. In the case of single cells, of vegetation, and of the 1/64 lower forms of animal life, we have no ground for conjecturing living personality. But in the case of the higher animals there is central direction, which suggests that in their case each animal body harbors a living person, or living persons. Our own self-consciousness is direct awareness of ourselves as such persons. 17 There are limits to such unified control, which indicate this association of personality, multiple personalities in successive alternations, and even multiple personalities in joint possession. This last case belongs to the pathology of religion, and in primitive times has been interpreted as demoniac possession. Thus, though life in its essence is the gain of intensity through freedom, yet it can also submit to canalization and so gain the massiveness of order. But it is not necessary merely to presuppose the drastic case of personal order. We may conjecture, though without much